Hello, this is Kay Coder, Professor of Sociology at Richland College. The following presentation is a product of the 2018 Richland College Fulbright-Hays Group Project Abroad to Vietnam. This will be used as part of an Introduction to Sociology chapter on culture. 10 faculty from Richland College and 2 educators from the Garland Independent School District traveled to Vietnam from July 10th through August 8th, 2018, to experience the many diverse cultures of Vietnam. This is our group at Ha Long Bay in northern Vietnam. Chapter 3 covers the topic of culture. What is the name of the country in front of the arrow? If you guessed Vietnam, then you're correct. Chapter 3 covers the topic of culture and is paired with the country of Vietnam. Vietnam is a collection and combination of many cultural influences over the centuries, and in the past century alone. Many historical events have had an effect on the culture of Vietnam today, and this is true of any culture. From 1858 to 1954, Vietnam was colonized by the French for a little over 100 years as part of French Indochina. During World War II, Vietnam was occupied by the Japanese, and to gain support of the Vietnamese people, Japan declared that it would return sovereignty to Vietnam. In 1945, the Empire of Vietnam was created, altering the name of the country to Vietnam. After the war, the French tried to regain control of the area, so 1946 was the beginning of the civil war between the French forces in Vietnam and the Vietnamese nationalists who wanted independence from France. In May 1954, the Viet Minh forces defeated the French, ending the 7.5-year Indochina War. In July of 1954, at a conference in Geneva, world powers agreed to divide Vietnam at the 17th parallel. From 1955 to 1975, South Vietnam was called the Republic of Vietnam and was supported by the U.S., Korea, Taiwan, Thailand, Australia, New Zealand, and Philippines. North Vietnam was supported by the People's Republic of China, Soviet Union, North Korea, and Cuba. So the French colonization of Vietnam, the division of Vietnam into North and South, and the Vietnam War have had a profound effect on Vietnamese culture, on the way of life of those who lived in the North, Central, and South, on the meaning of being Vietnamese, and on the relationship with the United States. The 5-kilometer strip of land on either side of the Ben Hai River is known by its American war name, the DMZ, or Demilitarized Zone. From 1954 to 1975, it acted as the buffer between the North and the South of Vietnam. When did the U.S. become involved in Vietnam? U.S. involvement dates back to the end of World War II, and the U.S. has had a military presence in Vietnam from 1954 to 1975. Each country has memorials with its own version of events that occurred during the war. This is the Vietnam War Memorial in Washington, D.C. This is the Vietnam War Memorial in Hanoi, where the same war is called the American War, not the Vietnam War. This is a picture of the Demilitarized Zone in Hue Province, and this is where the country was divided into North and South. In this chapter, we will explore how this division and many outside influences has affected Vietnamese culture and what it means to be Vietnamese today. So, what is culture? What makes up the American culture? What makes up Vietnamese culture? This is our Fulbright group dressed as Vietnamese royalty for dinner as part of a cultural experience in Vietnam. So culture consists of those habits of thinking, believing, and behaving that order our lives. It's a blueprint for living for a group whose members share a territory and language, feel responsible for each other, and call themselves by the same name. In other words, culture is the total way of life, especially the general customs and beliefs of a particular group of people at a particular point in time. Sharing a similar culture with others is what defines societies. The more we study another culture, the better we become at understanding our own culture. There are 2 types of culture, material and non-material culture. Material culture consists of all physical objects that people in one society have invented themselves or borrowed from members of other societies, and to which they have attached meaning. This could be anything, like any physical objects like tools or streets or toys, artifacts, clothing, cities, books. This is traffic in Ho Chi Minh City. This is clearly human created. Do you know what this is? Do you find it appetizing? The cultures to which we belong affect what we find appetizing or not. Material culture includes food that a people define as something they will eat. This is lunch in Hoi An. Fresh fish, anyone? This is an open market in Da Nang. And this is the Kai Rang floating market in the Mekong Delta. How do you get your fresh foods? Again, material culture includes food that people define as something they will eat, like hamburgers. Usually people give a meaning to the food. That meaning might be related to its origin, like American, to its health value, or to the best time of day to eat it, for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. Americans consider the hamburger as their food, and something they have exported around the world. Fast food burgers are generally not considered healthy. In the United States, hamburgers is something to eat for lunch and dinner, but not for breakfast. Now, how might someone who is vegetarian, vegan, or Hindu feel about the smell of grilling hamburgers? Non-material culture consists of non-physical or abstract human creations that we cannot hold or see. These include values, beliefs, norms, symbols, and language. Another example would be rules or ideas or customs, traditions. Can you tell the difference between the material and non-material cultural elements in your own culture? Once again, material culture are objects or belongings of a group of people that you can touch. And non-material culture would be like attitudes, ideas, or beliefs of a society. While we were in the larger cities in Vietnam, like Ho Chi Minh City or Hanoi, we had to learn how to cross the street. My Vietnamese students tried to prepare me before we arrived, but it's something that must be experienced firsthand. They warn me that traffic signals are only suggestions. How would you feel crossing this street in Ho Chi Minh City?
Success!
So how do we get culture? We are not born with culture. Culture is learned. So people are destined to learn the ways of the culture into which they are born and raised. There are 4 carriers of culture. The first one is symbols, and symbols are anything that carries a particular meaning recognized by members of a culture. Symbols can be signs, objects, signals, and words, and symbols help people to understand the world. Some road signs are universal. How would you interpret the sign on the right? Did you think it means no buildings allowed? Or did you guess that it means leaving city limits? What does the hand gesture given by the young girl mean? Why do people give that signal when they're being photographed? How did this custom originate? Skulls and crossbones are a symbol for danger. Even if you cannot read the language, you will know that there is danger ahead. Either that or there's pirates ahead. What does this mean? With symbols, even if you cannot understand the language, you'll know that there is danger involved. What do the stars and stripes in our flag symbolize? People socialized in the same culture will have the same understanding of symbols. Monuments of great leaders are symbols. Almost every American recognizes Abraham Lincoln on the left, and makes some immediate and basic associations. A president of the United States, supposedly freed the slaves, born in a log cabin. On the right we have Le Loi, who was a Vietnamese general and emperor who won back independence from Vietnam from China in 1428. He founded the later Le dynasty and became the most honored Vietnamese hero of the medieval period. The second carrier of culture is language. Now, language is a symbol, but it's more than just a symbol. Language is constantly evolving as societies create new ideas. We know the importance of sharing a language when we encounter others who speak a different language. Because of language differences, the U.S. military had to make signs that both Iraqis and Americans can read. However, if you did not know either language, it could be dangerous if you go beyond this point. How many languages can you see on these Vietnamese stores? Language has three critical relationships to culture. The first one is that it embodies the culture. Language embodies the values and meanings of a society, and you must know the language in order to participate in a culture. The values, meanings, rituals, ceremonies, stories, they're all passed on through language. And if you lose the language, you lose the culture. How many of you speak more than one language fluently? Do you know others who no longer know your cultural language? Have they also lost the culture? The second critical relationship that language has to culture is that it's a framework. Language gives us capabilities, but it also shapes and confines us. It goes along with the linguistic relativity hypothesis by Sapir-Whorf. The grammar, structure, and categories embodied in each language affect how its speakers see reality. It structures our perception and reflects our norms and values. We can only know the world in terms that our language provides. This hypothesis is also called the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis and states that we experience the world through our language. So if a person doesn't have the words to describe an experience, the person cannot have that experience. For example, how many words do we in Dallas, Texas have for snow? Snow, sleet, ice, hail. Actually, sleet, ice, and hail are not snow, so maybe snow. How many words do you think the Vietnamese have for snow? How many words do traditional Alaskan natives in the far Arctic North have for snow? They have over 20 words for snow. It tells you whether it's wet or dry, the thickness of the snow, whether it's heavy or compact. Why do they have so many words? Because snow is very important and you have to make these distinctions. But in Dallas, we cannot make the same distinctions that exist in the limited snow that falls in DFW area. They do happen, but we don't know them because we don't have a word for it. So it's difficult to explain or understand a concept for which our language does not have a word. Looks like the Scots have even more words for snow. 421 words? Really? What do you think of as going grocery shopping? Shopping for fresh food? Is this where you shop? What comes to mind when you think of fresh coconut milk? Here we're getting fresh coconut milk at a roadside park near the DMZ. The third critical relationship that language has to culture is that it's a symbol. Language symbolizes separation from others and unity within the group. A common language is often the most obvious outward sign that people share a common culture, and this is true of national cultures as well as subcultures such as youth. There are 3 major dialects spoken within Vietnam. I had 3 Vietnamese students in the same class. One was from the south, one was from the north, and one was from Hue in the center. They said they had a difficult time understanding each other's dialect in Vietnamese and would often speak in English in the class. So even though they were all Vietnamese, it was clear that they did not have the same culture. The northern dialect forms the basis of the standard language and is considered the prestige dialect. The third carrier of culture is norms. Norms are guidelines for behavior or shared rules of conduct, and they can only be understood within the context of the relevant culture. Norms and values are related, as norms specify means for achieving socially valued ends. There are three types of norms: folkways, the ways of the folk; mores, which are more important; and laws. Mores usually become laws because they're so vital to society. So let's talk about each one. Folkways are the customary, normal, habitual ways that a group does things. These are rules that apply to the mundane aspects of daily life, customs or habits that are passed on from one generation to the next, and there's no strong feeling of right or wrong attached. Folkways are enforced through informal sanctions like disapproval. So think about the folkways in your culture. What are the folkways for eating a meal in your culture? The typical American has no frame of reference for evaluating this table setting and the way people are taking food from this dish. Most would not consider that norms guiding the way we eat speak to the relationship of the individual to the group. We would not be happy that people are putting their hands in our food. For many Americans, the frame of reference includes individual place settings, individual choice about what and when to eat, and often disposable dishes, utensils, and cups at lunch. While most Americans acknowledge a steady diet of fast food is not healthy, they would still have trouble eating more healthy food in a so-called foreign way. Unlike the Western style, the Vietnamese don't have individual dishes when going out for dinner. Food is placed in the middle, and each member of the family has a small bowl and chopsticks, which allow him or her to take food from the different plates throughout the meal. This norm coincides with a culture that is considered collectivistic, where the group, family, or community is considered more important than individual choice, and we would eat our meals together and share. The second type of norm are mores. These are rules that require a sense of necessity, even sacredness, over time. They invoke strong community sanctions when they're violated. Violation of mores results in severe forms of punishment. Mores are associated with strong feelings of right and wrong, and people feel that mores are crucial for the maintenance of a decent and orderly society. Laws are universal norms for the particular society, enforced by formal sanctions on behalf of the entire society. These are rules that are enforced and sanctioned by the authority of the government. Now, laws may or may not be supported by the public, such as laws requiring the wearing of seatbelts in the United States. Not everyone is happy about that. This is a sign outside of a temple in Hue. There are norms for proper dress when entering a temple in Vietnam. This is our Fulbright group visiting a temple. Did we follow the norms for proper attire? Okay, so this is just a recap. Folkways, remember, are ways of the folk. They're appropriate behavior in daily life, no strong punishment, and informal sanctions like a frown or a gossip or a shouted insult. Mores are considered more important and essential to well-being and have stronger punishment and usually become laws because they are considered so important to society. Social control is largely achieved by the fact that following norms becomes so habitual that it seems more natural than norm violation. However, no society relies completely on this voluntary compliance, and they encourage conformity by the use of sanctions. Sanctions are rewards for conformity and punishments for nonconformity. There are informal sanctions that are through the spontaneous reaction from others, like affection, or approval or disapproval, or inclusion or exclusion, or a smile or a frown. And believe it or not, informal sanctions are the most effective because people want to belong to the group. Formal sanctions are penalties and rewards specified by law or code, like a ceremony for public acclaim, or a graduation ceremony when you've completed all of your courses, or being arrested for driving over the speed limit or getting a ticket, or being fired from a job for showing up late too much. The fourth carrier of culture are values. Values are shared standards of the desirable and usually referred to in terms of good and bad. They're the highest standards of right and wrong, and values serve as standards of evaluating norms. Now, American values are hard to pinpoint. Americans place a high value on freedom, and we teach these values to our children at a very young age, even when we don't really allow them to have too much freedom. These children are celebrating Freedom Fridays. These words express a common belief held by Americans that freedom is not free. More specifically, the freedom Americans enjoy is a result of voluntary and involuntary risks that servicemen and women have taken over the years of American history. Education and family are also important values to Americans and are considered important values to the Vietnamese too. Subcultures share in the overall culture of society, but also maintains its own values, norms, and lifestyles, even language. One characteristic central to all subcultures is that members are separated in some way from other people in a larger society. People don't necessarily choose to be in a subculture, but tend to form a subculture so they have a place to belong. The separation may be total or limited to selected aspects of life, such as work, friendships, religion, or medical care. Subcultures appear whenever access to the general culture is different for some members of our society. The more complex the culture and the more diverse the population, the greater the probability that the society has subcultures. As long as there is discrimination due to age, language, skin color, or other cultural distinctions, there will be a need for subcultural adaptations and support. Vietnam is a multi-nationality country with 54 distinct ethnic groups. The Viet, or Kin people, account for 80% of the country's population and mainly inhabit the Red River Delta, the Central Coastal Delta, and the Mekong Delta in major cities. The Hmong are concentrated in the northern highlands. Subcultures include youth subculture, ethnic and religious subcultures, and regional subcultures. This is a Buddhist temple in Vietnam. Think of all the subcultures to which you belong. For example, how many of you are from somewhere other than Texas? What did you think about Texas when you first came here? How did you have to adjust to the new culture? Maybe you experienced something called culture shock. Culture shock is the personal disorientation that may accompany entry into an unfamiliar social world. It describes a strain that people from one culture experience when they must reorient themselves to the ways of a new culture. One reason that people experience culture shock when visiting a foreign culture or returning home after becoming immersed in a foreign culture is that they hold the viewpoint of ethnocentrism. We'll talk about that later. Culture shock may appear because people aren't always expecting cultural differences. Electrical wiring along the roads in major cities in Vietnam were frightening to those of us who were from the United States, but didn't seem to concern those who were walking by in Vietnam. Ethnocentrism is the belief that one's own culture represents the only true and good way. It's the tendency to view the norms and values of our own culture as standards against which to judge the practices of other cultures. Now, there's actually something good about ethnocentrism because it generates social solidarity. For example, there are many different people in different regions and different ethnic groups, ages, and so forth in the United States. But if we call ourselves Americans, then it will make us feel like a community, even though we're very different. But ethnocentrism also inhibits understanding of other people's way of life when we choose to only look at our way as the best, the American way, and not understand why others do things differently and recognize it as just as good. Does this traditional Vietnamese meal look appetizing to you? Which restaurants do you think makes the most authentic dishes for your culture? Which culture do you think makes the best food? Are you ethnocentric? Sociologist Everett Hughes describes an extreme example of ethnocentrism, where people can be so engrossed in their own world that they lack curiosity about learning about any other culture. Cultural relativism requires that each cultural trait must be evaluated in the context of its own culture, not one's own. It involves recognizing the validity of each society's design for living, and not judging others based on your own culture. Experiencing new cultures offers an opportunity to practice cultural relativism. We were privileged to be able to spend 1 month in Vietnam to experience their culture in many different ways. The purpose of this sociology class is to allow you to share and learn from each other's culture so that you can develop cultural relativism too. This was a cultural exchange luncheon hosted by the Phang Dong Community College in Da Nang, Vietnam. They provided us with rich cultural festivals, singing, and traditional performances while serving us lunch. It was wonderful. Our Fulbright group had lunch at the same place that President Obama ate in 2016. Many of us ordered the Combo Obama, the exact same meal that our former president ate with Chef Anthony Bourdain. This restaurant named the meal the Combo Obama. There are many ways to develop cultural relativism, and food is probably the most common. Cultural relativism requires an open mind and a willingness to consider and even adapt to new values and norms. Cultural universals are broad patterns found in every society, such as the family system or rites of passage, and they're usually explained as biological in origin, as they are practices found in every society, such as laws that prohibit murder, or the wearing of clothing, or the type of housing. These are all derived from common problems posed by the natural and social environment. All societies have child care, a form of name giving, some type of religion, family system, etc. So, an example of cultural universal would be family, because every culture has some form of family. What is family? Family is a cultural universal, as each culture has some form of family. However, how each culture defines and experiences family is what we call culturally relative. What does a typical family home look like in your culture? In Vietnamese cities, many of the houses are narrow and built upward. Cultural variability reflects the variety of customs, beliefs, and artifacts devised by humans to meet universal needs. For example, how each culture defines and experiences family is culturally variable. There's less variation in traditional pre-industrial societies, as a smaller population changes slowly, than in modern industrialized societies. This family home has 2 family businesses at the front, an acupuncture and herbal medicine clinic owned by the father with one of the daughters as an assistant on the left, and a barber shop owned by the son on the right. The living quarters for the father, the mother, the 2 daughters, and the son and his wife are in the back of both of these businesses. Is this how your family and home are composed? What is the composition of your family and your home? Many families in Vietnam have their ancestors buried on the same land that they farm. Is this a common practice in your hometown? I hope that you've enjoyed this short cultural journey to Vietnam and can apply some of these concepts to understanding more about your own culture, as well as those which are different from ours. I'd like to give a special thanks to the Fulbright-Hays Group Project Abroad program and the U.S. Department of Education, as well as our team leaders, Dan Dow and Dr. Aditi Samarth, for making this educational journey possible. Thank you for taking the time to view this presentation.